The WNBA finally hits the moment everyone said would never come. Real crowds. Real ratings. Real money on the table. And what happens next isn't some outside hater trying to tear it down. It's the league tripping over itself from the inside. Because this whole thing didn't start with a fight on the court. It didn't start with a trade rumor, or a messy interview, or a coach throwing shade. It started with a t-shirt, and one sentence that sounded like a joke until you realized it wasn't. All-Star Weekend rolls around, and the league's trying to look united. Players come out in warm-ups wearing, "Pay us what you owe us." Simple message. Clear message. The kind of statement that says, "We've been patient, but we're done being quiet." Then Kelsey Plum gets asked about it, and she could have kept it clean. She could have just said, "We're standing together," and moved on. Instead, she adds this little extra line, almost like she can't help herself. She says the decision was made in a meeting that morning, and then she goes, "Not to tattletale, but 0 members of Team Clark were very present for that." And you could feel the mood change immediately. Because whether she meant it as a harmless jab or not, it landed like this. Even on a day that's supposed to be about solidarity, Caitlin Clark is still the dividing line. And that's when the internet did what it always does. Took a spark and poured gasoline on it. People weren't even debating the shirts anymore. They were debating what that sentence really meant. Was Plum calling Clark out for not caring about the league's bigger fight? Or was she doing what a lot of veterans have been accused of doing all season? Taking little shots at the one person the cameras won't stop following? And here's the thing. The reason that one sentence exploded is because the WNBA isn't just growing. It's changing its entire identity in real time. And whenever that happens, somebody feels left behind. But the wild part is what happened next, because once media people smelled blood in the water, they didn't just talk about Plum's comment. They used it to build a whole narrative about jealousy, power, and who the league belongs to now. The reason that comment hit so hard isn't because people suddenly became sensitive. It's because the WNBA is in a place it's never been before, and nobody's fully adjusted to what that actually means. For most of its existence, this league lived in survival mode. Empty seats. Limited TV coverage. Players flying commercial on brutal schedules and still getting told to be grateful. The conversation was always the same. Once the league grows, things will get better. Well, now the league is growing. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Attendance didn't just inch up. It jumped. TV numbers spiked in ways the league hadn't seen in decades. Jerseys started selling so fast that teams couldn't keep them stocked. Social media engagement went from niche to unavoidable. Games that used to feel invisible were suddenly popping up everywhere. And this didn't happen slowly. It happened all at once. So when people hear Kelsey Plum say, "Team Clark wasn't there," they don't hear a joke. They hear frustration bubbling up from veterans who spent years grinding in a league nobody paid attention to, only to watch the spotlight swing violently toward one rookie. That doesn't make Plum a villain. It makes her human. Because imagine being a star in your field for years, finally watching the industry explode, and realizing the public conversation suddenly revolves around someone who just walked in the door. Even if you're happy for them, there's a part of you that feels invisible again. And Caitlin Clark didn't ask for that spotlight. She didn't design the media cycle. She didn't decide that every road game would feel like a home game for her. She just showed up, played her style of basketball, and the audience followed. That's where the tension lives. The league is finally benefiting from momentum, but momentum doesn't distribute attention evenly. It piles it up in one place. And right now, that place is Clark. That's why the t-shirt moment mattered. The message was about money, but the reaction was about credit. About who carried the league when nobody was watching, and who gets praised now that everybody is. And once that conversation starts, it doesn't stay quiet. It leaks into interviews. It leaks into voting. It leaks onto the court. You can already feel the shift in how fans talk about games. Every hard foul on Clark becomes a headline. Every no call becomes a conspiracy. Every mistake she makes gets dissected twice as hard because people are waiting to see if the hype cracks. And if you're enjoying this breakdown so far, this is one of those moments where subscribing actually makes sense. Not as a favor, but because these stories evolve fast, and once the next shoe drops, the narrative will flip again just as quickly. Because the next phase of the story is where things really escalate. This is when a national voice steps in and says what a lot of people were already thinking, but says it in a way that pours even more fuel on the fire. That's when Colin Cowherd jumps in and reframes the entire situation with one phrase that instantly split the audience in half. Colin Cowherd didn't ease into this conversation. He didn't hedge, and he didn't soften his point to avoid backlash. He looked at the situation and basically said what a lot of people were thinking but didn't want to say out loud. The WNBA finally has leverage, and some players are acting like they don't recognize it. Cowherd made it clear that he doesn't have a problem with players asking for more money. In fact, he said they deserve more. The league's finally on a hot streak, the investment is starting to pay off, and the players should absolutely push while the iron's hot. But then he drew a line. His issue wasn't the shirts. It wasn't the message. It was the decision to publicly take a swipe, no matter how small, at the one player who's driving more attention to the league than anyone else. That's when he dropped the analogy that stuck. He said the WNBA went from a Motel 6 in a sketchy part of town to a Four Seasons in the shopping district. Same league, same players, completely different treatment. And his point was simple. When someone joins the band and suddenly the hotels get better, the flights get better, and the crowds get bigger, you don't complain about the new member. You protect them. Because whether people like it or not, Caitlin Clark isn't just another rookie. She's the person casual fans recognize. She's the reason random sports accounts that never posted about the WNBA before suddenly can't stop talking about it. Cowherd wasn't saying Clark is better than everyone else. He was saying she moves the needle in a way no one else currently does. And in his mind, that makes her the league's golden goose. And once he framed it that way, the conversation shifted. Now it wasn't just, did Kelsey Plum take a shot? It became, why would you ever risk damaging the league's biggest asset while negotiating for more money? That's the part that made people uncomfortable. Because it forces a hard truth into the open. Not all star power is equal. Some players are great. Some players are respected. And then once in a while, someone shows up who brings a completely different audience with them. Cowherd even pointed out that Clark doesn't actually need the league financially the way most players do. Her endorsement deals alone already have her set. So if negotiations get messy, she'll be fine either way. That's not a flex. It's leverage. And it's exactly why he argued that veterans should be careful about how they treat her publicly. But here's where things really start to crack. Because while Cowherd was calling Clark the golden goose on national TV, something else was happening quietly behind the scenes. Something that made his argument look less like a hot take and more like a warning. The All-Star voting results were coming in, and they told a very different story about how Clark is viewed by her own peers. On paper, All-Star voting sounds simple. Fans vote. Media votes. Players vote. The results get blended together, and the league presents it as a balanced snapshot of who mattered most that season. But in reality, All-Star voting is never just about basketball. It's about respect. It's about hierarchy. It's about who the locker room believes belongs at the top. And that's why Caitlin Clark's results lit everything on fire. Fans ranked her first among guards. No surprise there. Every building she plays in feels louder. Every broadcast featuring her pulls better numbers. Casual viewers tune in specifically to watch her. So fan support wasn't close. She ran away with it. But then the player votes came out. Clark finished 9th. Not 2nd. Not 4th. 9th. And that number changed the entire conversation overnight. Because once people saw that gap, first with fans, 9th with players, the story stopped being about popularity and started being about intent. People weren't asking, is Clark good enough? They were asking, why don't her peers want to acknowledge her? Supporters saw it as blatant pettiness. They argued the numbers didn't make sense, that her production and impact were obvious, and that ranking her 9th looked like a coordinated message rather than an honest evaluation. On the other side, defenders pushed back hard. They said fans don't see the full game. They said players value different things: defense, consistency, experience, game flow. They said just because someone sells tickets doesn't mean they automatically deserve peer validation. But here's the part nobody could ignore. Even if you believe Clark shouldn't have been first, ninth still felt deliberate. That's the kind of ranking that doesn't come from indifference. It comes from friction. And suddenly, every complaint about media bias from past seasons started getting replayed in reverse. For years, WNBA players said they weren't promoted fairly, that the league didn't know how to market its stars, that outside forces decided who mattered. Now the league gets a breakout star the public can't stop watching, and some players appear to be pushing back against the spotlight instead of leaning into it. That contradiction is what made this moment explode. Because it wasn't just about Caitlin Clark anymore. It was about whether the WNBA actually wants a single face of the league, or whether it resents the idea of one. And once that tension is out in the open, it doesn't stay confined to ballots and talk shows. It spills onto the court. Hard fouls start getting clipped and replayed. Trash talk gets amplified. Every physical possession gets framed as either welcome to the league or targeting. And that's where the situation takes a darker turn, because when competition and resentment blur together, the game itself starts carrying emotional weight it was never meant to hold. Once the all-star voting numbers were out in the open, everything that happened on the court started getting reinterpreted through a different lens. Plays that would have been shrugged off in any other season suddenly felt loaded. A hard bump wasn't just a hard bump anymore. It was sending a message. A no-call wasn't just a missed whistle. It was proof the league doesn't know how to handle her. And whether that was fair or not didn't even matter, because perception had already taken over. Caitlin Clark was no longer just playing basketball. She was playing inside a storyline. Every time she got knocked off balance, fans clipped it. Every time she jawed back, it went viral. And every time officials let contact go, people argued about whether the league was failing to protect its biggest draw or simply letting the game be physical. This is the moment where success becomes complicated. Because when a player attracts this much attention, they also attract resistance. Not always out of jealousy, sometimes just out of competitiveness, pride, or the refusal to let one person dominate the narrative. Veteran players have spent their entire careers fighting to be taken seriously. They didn't grind through empty arenas just to become footnotes in someone else's breakout story. So when the coverage tilts too far toward one name, the pushback is almost inevitable. But here's the dangerous part. Once fans believe a player is being singled out, the league loses control of the story. Every interaction becomes evidence. Every rivalry turns personal. And the sport itself starts feeling secondary to the drama wrapped around it. That's when commentators stepped in and started saying the quiet part out loud. This doesn't feel like normal rookie treatment anymore. It feels like a league struggling to adjust to a new power structure. And that's when the comparisons started getting louder. People weren't just saying Clark was popular. They were saying she was transformative. That she changed how games are watched, how arenas feel, how broadcasts are marketed. And once you use that word, transformative, the conversation shifts again. Because history shows that when a league gets a player like that, things don't calm down. They intensify. Which is why Cowherd took it one step further and made a comparison that instantly divided people. Not because it was perfect, but because it forced everyone to think bigger than one season. He started comparing Caitlin Clark's early treatment to what happens when a generational star shows up and the league hasn't caught up yet. And that's where the Michael Jordan parallel enters the chat. The Michael Jordan comparison is the part that makes people shift in their seats, because it sounds outrageous at first, until you understand what's actually being compared. Nobody serious is saying Caitlin Clark is Michael Jordan. The comparison isn't about rings or legacy. It's about impact. About what happens when one player shows up and forces an entire league to reorganize around them. Cowherd's point was simple. When a player becomes must-watch, the league doesn't get to pretend they're just another name on the roster. Jordan didn't walk into the NBA and instantly get embraced by veterans. He got hit. He got pushed. He got challenged physically because teams didn't know how else to deal with him. The league didn't fully protect him early on because they hadn't adjusted to the idea that he was the product. And Clark is in that same uncomfortable phase. Defenses can't guard her normally. Traps don't always work. Letting her shoot from deep is a mistake. So the response becomes physicality. Bumps. Pressure. Making every possession exhausting. And when that doesn't slow her down, frustration starts to show. This is where the enforcer conversation comes in, not as some dramatic conspiracy, but as a historical pattern. When a team realizes their star is getting targeted because she's embarrassing people, they respond by adding muscle. Someone who absorbs contact. Someone who sends a message back. Not to start fights, but to set boundaries. That's not unique to Clark. It's not even unique to basketball. Every league that produces a breakout star eventually has to answer the same question. How do we let the game stay competitive without letting resentment turn into punishment? Because once physical play starts carrying emotional weight, the risk isn't just injury. It's narrative damage. Fans don't tune in to watch greatness get chipped away. They tune in to watch it rise. And this is where the league finds itself stuck between two pressures at the same time. On one side, players demanding respect and fair compensation, rightfully so. On the other, a growing audience that expects the league to protect the very thing they came to see. And if you think that tension feels uncomfortable now, it only gets heavier from here. Because the next layer of this story isn't about fouls or votes or interviews. It's about identity. About who gets to represent the WNBA in the public eye. And whether the league actually wants a single face at all. This is where the conversation stops being about Caitlin Clark specifically and starts being about identity. Because deep down, this isn't just a fight over fouls or voting or press conference comments. It's about who the WNBA believes it is, and who it's willing to become. For years, players begged for attention. They wanted coverage. They wanted marketing. They wanted the league to push stars the way men's leagues do. And now that attention has arrived in full force, it didn't come in the shape everyone expected. It didn't spread evenly. It locked onto one player. And that's uncomfortable, because it forces a question nobody likes answering out loud. Is it better for the league to rise together slowly, or for one superstar to drag it into the mainstream fast? Some players genuinely believe the league should never revolve around a single face. That the WNBA's strength has always been its depth, its parity, its collective identity. From that perspective, the Clark spotlight feels like a threat to everything they built. Others see it differently. They see a once-in-a-generation opportunity. A moment where the casual sports world finally cares enough to stick around, and where fighting the wave only slows everyone down. Neither side is crazy. That's what makes this messy. Because when you're used to being overlooked, suddenly being overshadowed hits different. It feels unfair, even if the attention itself is good for business. And when resentment mixes with opportunity, people don't always act strategically. They act emotionally. That's why little things start to matter more than they should. Who shows up to meetings? Who gets mentioned first on broadcasts? Who gets defended online? And who doesn't? And once that mindset sets in, every moment becomes symbolic. The shirts become a loyalty test. The voting becomes a statement. The physicality becomes proof of intent. Meanwhile, the league itself is caught in the middle. Because from a business standpoint, the formula is obvious. More eyes means more money. More money means better deals, better travel, better pay. That's what everyone wants. But culturally, it's harder. You can't just tell players, ignore your pride. You can't tell veterans, accept being secondary. And you definitely can't tell fans to stop choosing favorites. So the WNBA sits at this crossroads, growing faster than its internal dynamics can keep up with. And the irony is brutal. The league finally has what it always asked for. But success is exposing every unresolved tension that existed long before Caitlin Clark ever stepped on the court. And the scariest part? This is probably the calm version of what's coming next. Here's the part that doesn't get said enough. Moments like this don't last forever. Leagues don't get unlimited chances to cross into the mainstream. Sometimes you get one wave, one perfect storm where attention, timing, and personality line up just right. Miss it, or fracture during it, and the window closes quietly. That's why this Caitlin Clark moment matters so much beyond basketball. Because the WNBA isn't just negotiating contracts right now. It's negotiating its future identity. Is it a league that fights its breakout stars, or one that figures out how to grow with them? Is it a place where success is shared strategically, or resented emotionally? And the truth is, both outcomes are still on the table. If the league embraces this era, the upside is massive. Sold-out arenas stop being special and start being normal. Sponsors don't hesitate. Media coverage deepens instead of chasing drama. Young fans grow up seeing the WNBA as a default part of sports culture, not a niche. But if the internal tension keeps spilling into public view, if every big moment turns into a loyalty test or a proxy war, the story becomes exhausting. And casual fans don't stay for exhausting stories. They move on. That's what makes this moment so delicate. Caitlin Clark doesn't have to be the only story for the league to benefit from her. But pretending she isn't a catalyst won't work either. The attention is here. The money is circling. The eyes are locked in. What happens next depends on whether the league rides the wave, or argues about who deserves credit for it. And that's why this story is bigger than one comment, one vote, or one hard foul. It's about whether the WNBA can stay aligned long enough to turn momentum into permanence. If you've been following this whole breakdown and you want more deep dives like this, where the story behind the headline actually gets unpacked, make sure you're subscribed. Not because it helps an algorithm, but because these situations evolve fast, and the narrative usually flips when people least expect it. And before you go, let me know what you think. Was Kelsey Plum out of line? Or just honest? Is the league handling the Clark era the right way, or fighting itself at the worst possible moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this gave you a new perspective, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because this story isn't over yet, and the next chapter might be even louder than this one.